Poor Janitor helped an old man, unaware he is the undercover boss. The city lights blurred behind sheets of relentless rain as Marlene Vasquez hurried toward the gleaming entrance of the opulence Grand Hotel. Her second-hand umbrella, already fighting a losing battle against the wind, finally surrendered with a decisive crack. A gust sent it tumbling down the street like urban tumbleweed, leaving her exposed to the downpour. "Perfect," she muttered, pulling her worn jacket over her head. By the time she reached the employee entrance, her uniform was soaked through in patches, her carefully applied makeup running in thin rivulets down her cheeks. The contrast between her appearance and the hotel's opulence wasn't lost on her as she swiped her keycard. The Opulence Grand lived up to its name with marble floors that gleamed like still water, crystal chandeliers that refracted light into 1,000 dancing prisms, and gold leaf detailing that adorned nearly every surface not already occupied by rare orchids or priceless art. The locker room smelled of industrial cleaner and cheap perfume. Marlene quickly changed into her dry uniform, a nondescript gray outfit with the hotel's ornate crest embroidered above her heart, and her name badge pinned precisely below it. 29 years old with already tired eyes, she pulled her dark hair into a tight bun and reapplied her makeup with practiced efficiency. Time was luxury she couldn't afford, not with Marco waiting at home. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Hernandez next door. "Marco had a good dinner. Meds at 8. He's watching that space documentary again." Marlene smiled. Her brother's fascination with the cosmos never waned, even as his body betrayed him more each year. At 26, muscular dystrophy had confined him to a wheelchair, but his mind remained as bright and expansive as the universe he studied through documentaries and borrowed library books. "Starting shift. Thank you. We'll transfer money tomorrow," she texted back. The service elevator deposited her into the back corridors of the hotel's main floor, where the thunder of the storm was replaced by a different kind of tension. Through the staff door, she could see the lobby had descended into controlled chaos. Guests in expensive attire stood in impatient clusters, their luggage forming islands around which harried staff navigated. The storm had disrupted flights, diverted travelers, and frayed nerves. "There you are!" Supervisor Collins appeared beside her, clipboard clutched like a shield against the disarray. "Lobby's a mess. Conference check-in plus the storm refugees. Start with the East Wing entrance, puddles everywhere, then hit the restrooms. They're being used like changing rooms." He didn't wait for her acknowledgement before disappearing into the fray, already barking orders into his headset. Marlene retrieved her cart from the supply closet and moved through the lobby like a ghost, present but unseeable. Years in service jobs had taught her the art of invisibility. She mopped efficiently around designer shoes and Louis Vuitton luggage, collecting discarded coffee cups and wiping down rain-streaked surfaces. Near the front desk, a cluster of guests grew increasingly vocal. "This is absolutely unacceptable. We've been waiting for 40 minutes. A woman in a fur coat declared, her diamond earrings catching the light with each indignant head shake. The front desk manager, a thin man with a permanent smile that never reached his eyes, offered practiced apologies. "We're accommodating everyone as quickly as possible, ma'am. The system crash affected all our booking records, but we're sorting it manually." Marlene worked around them, invisible as always, when a different voice caught her attention, softer, with a slight quaver. "Please, I just need a room for tonight." "Any room." An elderly man stood at the far end of the counter, separated from the demanding crowd. His tweed coat hung heavy with rain, and his gray hair was plastered to his forehead. Unlike the others, he carried only a weathered leather briefcase and spoke without raising his voice. The desk clerk barely glanced at him. "I'm sorry, sir, but as I explained, we're fully booked due to the conference and the storm. Our system shows no vacancies. But surely there must be something. I don't need anything fancy." The old man persisted, his fingers trembling slightly against the counter's polished surface. The clerk's smile tightened. "Sir, I don't control the weather or the booking system. Perhaps try the Comfort Inn by the highway?" He turned away before the old man could respond, calling out, "I can help the next guest here." The old man stood there, dripping onto the marble floor Marlene had just cleaned, looking lost. Unlike the other guests, no one rushed to assist him, no bellhop offered to call a cab, no concierge suggested alternatives. He was as invisible as she was, but without the benefit of choosing to be. He moved slowly to a corner of the lobby, lowering himself onto a bench with a wince that spoke of aching joints and too many years. From her position near the restrooms, Marlene watched as he pulled out an old flip phone, trying several times to dial before shaking his head and returning it to his pocket. She shouldn't get involved. Hotel policy was clear: maintenance staff did not engage with guests directly. That was for front desk, concierge, or guest services. She had already been warned once this month for helping a child find her parents instead of calling security. But something in the old man's dignified resignation pulled at her. He reminded her of her late grandfather, who had raised her and Marco after their parents' accident, always putting their needs first, never complaining, even when life was hardest. Marlene glanced around. The lobby was still chaotic, the staff overwhelmed. No one was watching her. No one ever did. Decision made, she wheeled her cart toward the old man, stopping just close enough to speak without being overheard. "Sir," she said quietly, "I think I might be able to help you." "Follow me," Marlene whispered. "But wait until I signal you." The old man's eyes, pale blue and surprisingly sharp, studied her face. After a moment, he nodded once. Marlene pushed her cart toward the service corridor, pausing near a large potted palm to wipe an already spotless surface. When the front desk staff became occupied with a particularly vocal guest demanding to speak to a manager, she gave a subtle nod. The old man rose with surprising grace for someone who had appeared so weary moments before. He walked casually toward her, his gait measured and unhurried, as if he belonged exactly where he was going. In seconds they slipped through the service door unnoticed. "We need to be quick," Marlene explained, leading him down a narrow hallway lined with supply shelves. "Security cameras don't cover this section well because of budget cuts last year." She offered this information without thinking, then bit her lip. "I probably shouldn't have said that. Your secret's safe with me," the old man replied, his voice gentler than she expected. "I'm Gerald, by the way. Marlene Vasquez." She led him to the staff lounge, a cramped room with mismatched furniture, a small refrigerator, and a coffee machine that produced a substance more akin to motor oil than anything consumable. At this hour, with most staff handling the lobby chaos, the room stood empty. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's warm and dry." Gerald set his briefcase down carefully. "It's perfect." "Thank you?" Marlene hesitated. She was already breaking at least 3 hotel policies. What was one more? She retrieved a clean blanket from the linen storage closet across the hall, one of the plush ones reserved for VIP guests, and handed it to him. "Here. Your coat's soaked through." Gerald accepted it with a nod of thanks, removing his wet coat to reveal a simple button-down shirt and worn suspenders. Not the attire she would have expected from someone staying at the Opulence Grand, even on a budget. "Let me make you some coffee," she offered, moving to the ancient machine. "It's instant and terrible, but it's hot. Instant coffee has gotten me through worse storms than this," Gerald replied, settling into a chair that creaked under his weight. While the kettle boiled, Marlene retrieved her dinner from the refrigerator, a homemade sandwich wrapped in plastic and an apple. She placed them on the table before him. "I couldn't possibly," he began. "Please," she interrupted. "I had a late lunch. And there's a vending machine if I get hungry later." This was a lie, but a kind one. Her late lunch had been a granola bar eaten hurriedly between jobs. The vending machine prices were highway robbery on her salary. Gerald seemed to sense the untruth but accepted the food with dignity. "Thank you, Marlene. Your kindness won't be forgotten." She poured the coffee and sat across from him, aware she should return to work but reluctant to leave him alone just yet. "Are you stranded because of the storm?" she asked. Gerald took a careful sip of coffee. "Something like that. My original accommodations fell through. Poor planning on my part." Do you have family nearby who could help? A shadow passed over his face. My family is complicated. My daughter lives across the country. My son passed away 5 years ago. I'm sorry, Marlene said reflexively. Life happens to us all in different ways, Gerald replied. He took a bite of the sandwich. This is excellent. Did you make it? Marlene nodded. I make lunches for my brother and me every morning. Saves money. Your brother works nearby. No, Marco's at home. He has muscular dystrophy, confined to a wheelchair now. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She rarely spoke about her personal life at work, yet something about Gerald's attentive silence invited confidence. It's just the two of us since our grandfather died. I work here nights and at a coffee shop mornings. The medical bills are. She trailed off, suddenly embarrassed. I'm sorry. You don't need to hear all this. On the contrary, Gerald said, his gaze surprisingly intent. I'm interested. Tell me about Marco. For the next 15 minutes, Marlene found herself talking about Marco's brilliant mind, his fascination with astrophysics despite never having formal education beyond high school, his dream of someday visiting the Kennedy Space Center. He's never complains, she said. Not once, even on his worst days. He sounds remarkable, Gerald said. As is his sister. Marlene glanced at her watch and jumped up. I'm so sorry, I've been gone too long. My supervisor will be looking for me. Of course. I've kept you from your duties. You can stay here until morning, she said hurriedly. The early shift doesn't arrive until 5, and most people use the break room near the kitchen instead. There's a couch in the corner that isn't too uncomfortable. Gerald nodded. I'm in your debt, Marlene Vasquez. It's nothing, she insisted. Just please be gone before anyone finds you. I really need this job. I understand completely. Marlene headed for the door, then paused. Why were you trying to stay at this hotel specifically? There are cheaper options nearby. Gerald's expression changed subtly, something calculating entering his gaze before softening again. Sometimes we need to see things from a different perspective to truly understand their value, he said cryptically. She didn't have time to decipher his meaning. I'll try to check on you later if I can. As she turned to leave, Gerald called softly. Marlene? She looked back. People like you are rarer than you might think, he said, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made her slightly uncomfortable, as if he were memorizing not just her face but something deeper. Never lose that quality, no matter what happens. The odd statement lingered in her mind as she hurried back to her abandoned cleaning cart, unaware that the small act of kindness she had just performed would ripple outward in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. Morning light filtered through the lobby's grand windows, the storm having passed during the night. The polished marble floor reflected sunbeams where puddles had stood hours before. Marlene completed her shift at 4 a.m., sneaking one last check on Gerald before leaving. He'd been sleeping peacefully on the staff room couch, his briefcase clutched protectively against his chest. She'd left him a note with directions to the service exit and slipped away. After 3 hours of fitful sleep and helping Marco with his morning routine, Marlene dragged herself back to the Opulence Grand for an unexpected call-in. Her supervisor's voice had been tense over the phone. Management meeting. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. Dread pooled in her stomach as she entered through the employee entrance. Had someone discovered Gerald? Had he been caught leaving? The questions circled like vultures as she made her way toward the administrative offices. There she is, said a voice as Marlene rounded the corner. Richard Collins, her direct supervisor, stood with arms crossed beside Diane Hemsworth, the general manager. A security guard hovered nearby, his expression impassive. Ms. Vasquez? Hemsworth said, her voice clipped and cold. My office. Now. The general manager's office was a study in calculated intimidation. Awards lined the walls, the desk oversized, the guest chairs positioned slightly lower than Hemsworth's leather throne. 2 monitors displayed security footage, paused on grainy images. Would you care to explain this? Hemsworth turned one monitor toward Marlene. The footage clearly showed Marlene leading Gerald through the service corridor. The timestamp read 10:42 p.m. Her throat went dry. "I was helping an elderly gentleman who needed." "And this?" Hemsworth interrupted, advancing the footage to show Marlene retrieving the VIP blanket, then later returning to the staff lounge with her dinner. "He was soaked through from the rain," Marlene explained, her voice small. "The front desk told him there were no rooms available because of the system glitch. He had nowhere to go." Collins scoffed. "So you decided hotel policy doesn't apply to you? That you can just turn our staff facilities into your personal charity shelter?" "No, Do you know what could have happened?" Hemsworth cut in again. "He could have been anyone, a thief, a security threat. He could have stolen guest information, damaged property, or worse. He was just an old man caught in the storm," Marlene protested. "An old man who conveniently disappeared before the morning shift arrived." The security guard noted, speaking for the first time. "We've reviewed all exit footage. No sign of him leaving." Marlene's confusion must have shown on her face because Collins leaned forward. "That's right. Your harmless old man managed to exit the building without being recorded by any of our security cameras. Care to explain that trick?" She couldn't. She had assumed Gerald would follow her directions to the service exit, which definitely had cameras. "I don't understand," she admitted. "He was just sleeping when I checked on him before leaving my shift." "What we understand," Hemsworth said, standing to emphasize her authority, "is that you violated Section 4.3 of the Employee Handbook. Staff shall not engage directly with guests outside their prescribed duties. You violated Section 7.8. Staff shall not provide unauthorized access to hotel facilities. And you violated Section 12.1, misappropriation of hotel property for personal use." "The blanket?" Marlene asked incredulously. "I was going to return it to laundry myself." "And what about the potential security breach?" Collins interrupted. "What about the liability if something had happened to him on hotel property? Did you think about any of that?" Marlene stared at her hands. "I was just trying to help. This isn't a charity, Ms. Vasquez. This is a 5-star establishment with protocols and standards," Hemsworth said, her voice softening into something more dangerous. "However noble you thought your actions were, no good deed gives you a free pass here." The security guard stepped forward. "We need to know who he was and how he left undetected. His name was Gerald. That's all I know," Marlene said truthfully. "He never told me his last name." "Gerald," Collins repeated flatly. "Just Gerald. How convenient." The interrogation continued for another 20 minutes. They questioned her about what Gerald had said, what he was wearing, what was in his briefcase. Marlene answered honestly, growing increasingly worried about her job security with each passing minute. Finally, Hemsworth sighed dramatically. "Let's be clear about something, Ms. Vasquez. In any other circumstance, you'd be terminated immediately." A cold weight settled in Marlene's chest. She couldn't lose this job. Not with Marco's medication costs increasing again next month. "However," Hemsworth continued, "given your otherwise clean record and the current staffing shortages, I'm placing you on 2 weeks probation. One more infraction, being late, uniform violation, anything, and you're done. Additionally, your upcoming raise review is postponed indefinitely." Relief mingled with indignation as Marlene nodded. The raise had been promised months ago, already calculated into her tight budget. "You'll also work double shifts for the next week to cover the extra security sweeps we're implementing because of your little stunt," Collins added with a smirk. "Is that all?" Marlene asked quietly. "For now," Hemsworth replied. "Though I suggest you spend your probation period reconsidering whether the opulence grand is the right fit for someone with your humanitarian inclinations." Dismissed, Marlene walked numbly through the hotel's back corridors. Double shifts meant canceling her coffee shop hours, which meant less income when she needed it most. The postponed raise meant continuing to juggle which bills to pay each month. All because she couldn't ignore an old man in need. As she changed into her uniform, a cleaning staff member named Eliza approached hesitantly. "I heard what happened," she whispered. "That was decent, what you did. Most people here would have just walked past him." "Fat lot of good it did me," Marlene replied bitterly. "Still," Eliza insisted, "it matters that someone still gives a damn. This place beats it out of most of us eventually." Marlene managed a weak smile as she tied back her hair. "Thanks, Eliza. By the way," Eliza added, glancing around to ensure they were alone, "something weird is happening upstairs. Corporate bigwigs arrived an hour ago. Management's running around like ants on a hot plate. Probably here for the conference," Marlene suggested without interest, her mind still on her financial calculations. "Maybe," Eliza shrugged. But Hemsworth looked like she'd seen a ghost when she got called upstairs. "Whatever's happening, it's big." Marlene barely registered the information as she gathered her cleaning supplies. Corporate was the least of her concerns right now. She had a brother to support, bills to pay, and a career hanging by a thread, all because she'd shown kindness to a mysterious old man who'd vanished without a trace. Little did she know, Gerald hadn't disappeared at all. And the ripples from her act of compassion were about to become a tidal wave. "Replay that section again, please." Gerald Whitmore leaned forward in his leather chair, eyes fixed on the wall-mounted screen displaying security footage from the previous night. The expansive corporate boardroom on the top floor of the Opulence Grand fell silent as the requested clip began again. On screen, Marlene led the soaked elderly man, Gerald himself in his undercover attire, through the service corridor. The camera caught her hesitation, the quick glance over her shoulder, and the gentle way she guided him away from public view. "Pause there," Gerald instructed. The image froze on Marlene's face, concern etched in her features, compassion evident even in the grainy footage. The 6 executives seated around the mahogany table shifted uncomfortably. They'd been summoned urgently that morning, told only that CEO Gerald Whitmore had made an unannounced visit and discovered significant operational concerns. None had expected to find their boss transformed from the distinguished silver-haired executive they knew into the rumpled, old man, now replaying his covert inspection. 23 hotels? Gerald said quietly. "I've visited 23 of our properties over the past 3 months. Different disguises, different scenarios, all designed to test one simple thing. Has the Whitmore standard of excellence become just empty words on a plaque?" He stood, pacing slowly before the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. At 68, Gerald Whitmore still commanded respect with his posture alone, straight-backed and purposeful despite the years. "My father opened our first hotel with a simple philosophy: treat every guest like family," he continued. "When I took over 40 years ago, we had 3 properties. Now we have 86 across 4 continents. Growth I was proud of, until I began to wonder what we'd sacrifice to achieve it." Rebecca Chin, Chief Operations Officer, cleared her throat. "Gerald, if there were service issues during your stay..." "Service issues?" Gerald interrupted with a sharp laugh. "Rebecca, I was turned away at the front desk of my own flagship hotel during a storm. Not just turned away, dismissed, as if I were an inconvenience rather than a paying customer. And I wasn't even the only one. I watched 3 other people receive the same treatment before me." He pressed a button on the remote, advancing to footage of the front desk. "Look at this interaction. The clerk doesn't make eye contact. Doesn't offer alternatives. Doesn't even pretend to check the system thoroughly. He just wants the problem, me, to go away." The executives watched in uncomfortable silence. "Now contrast that with this woman," Gerald continued, returning to the footage of Marlene. "A janitor. Someone who, according to our own corporate structure, has no customer service responsibilities whatsoever. Someone who risks her job to help a stranger because it's the right thing to do. Sir," ventured Jason Morris, the company's legal counsel. "While her intentions may have been good, she violated several security protocols." "Protocols?" Gerald's hand slammed down on the table. "Is that all we've become? A company of protocols and policies that trump basic human decency? The room fell silent again. Gerald's voice softened. When I began this secret evaluation program, I expected to find issues with outdated facilities, perhaps inefficient processes. What I didn't expect was to discover we've systematically engineered compassion out of our organization. He pressed another button on the remote. A spreadsheet appeared on screen. This is what I found across our properties. 17 locations where I was treated as an inconvenience rather than a guest. 9 where staff openly complained about other customers within my hearing. 12 where maintenance issues were visibly neglected. And only 4 where anyone, showed genuine concern when I presented as someone in need. Rebecca leaned forward. Gerald, with all due respect, this seems like an extreme reaction to a single bad experience. This isn't about one experience. Gerald cut in. This is about a pattern. A culture that's developed under our watch while we've been congratulating ourselves on quarterly earnings and expansion metrics. He clicked to another screen, employee records. Marlene's photo appeared alongside her employment history. Marlene Vasquez. 29 years old. 5 years with the company. Not a single sick day in the past 3 years. Consistently positive peer reviews. Yet she's never been promoted. Her scheduled raise was postponed 3 times, according to her file. Meanwhile, she works a second job and cares for a disabled brother. The HR director shifted uncomfortably. We can't base advancement decisions on personal circumstances. I'm not talking about charity. Gerald interrupted. I'm talking about recognizing value. This woman embodies everything our company claims to stand for, yet she's treated as disposable. He clicked again, revealing the personnel file of Richard Collins, Marlene's supervisor. This man has received 4 guest complaints in the past month alone. His staff turnover rate is 42% higher than any other department. Yet he received a bonus last quarter for cost control measures, which apparently meant denying promised raises to hardworking employees like Ms. Vasquez. Gerald moved to another file, Diane Hemsworth, the general manager. And Ms. Hemsworth has systematically reduced staff training hours while reporting them as completed. She's cut corners on maintenance, substituted lower quality amenities while keeping premium pricing, and fostered a culture of fear rather than excellence. All while reporting impressive profit margins that earned her recognition at our last leadership retreat. He closed the laptop with finality. Ladies and gentlemen, I founded the Stay Incognito initiative because I sensed we were losing our way. What I didn't realize was how completely we'd already lost it. Gerald returned to his seat at the head of the table. Effective immediately, I'm implementing Project Restoration across all properties. We're going to remember who we are and why we exist. For the next 30 minutes, he outlined his vision, a complete restructuring of management evaluation criteria, prioritizing guest satisfaction and employee retention over short-term profit metrics. New training programs centered on empathy and problem-solving rather than rigid protocol adherence. And most immediately, a leadership audit at every location, starting with the Opulence Grand. What about the janitor, Ms. Vasquez? Asked Rebecca, making notes. A small smile played at Gerald's lips. She's currently on probation for helping me. Let's fix that, shall we? As the meeting adjourned, Gerald remained behind, studying Marlene's image on the screen. In his 68 years, he'd learned to recognize authentic character, a quality no business school could teach and no amount of money could buy. In Marlene, he'd found something increasingly rare in his company, a person who did the right thing when no one was watching. Or so she thought. In reality, the most important eyes in the company had been watching very carefully indeed. Marlene's mop moved rhythmically across the marble floor, each stroke a meditation of sorts. 3 days had passed since her disciplinary meeting. 3 days of double shifts, aching feet, and calculating which bills could wait another month. 3 days of avoiding Hemsworth's cold glare and Colin's smug satisfaction. Through the lobby windows, she noticed sleek black cars pulling up to the entrance. Men and women in impeccable suits emerged, their expressions serious as hotel staff rushed to greet them. "Corporate auditors," whispered Eliza, appearing beside Marlene with her own cleaning cart. "Been here since Tuesday." Something big's happening. Hope they're not cutting more positions, Marlene replied, thinking of Marco's upcoming specialist appointment. She couldn't afford to lose even one shift. Actually, rumor is they're reviewing management, Eliza said, her voice dropping further. Security took Hemsworth's computer yesterday, and Collins has been shut in meetings all morning looking like he's about to throw up. Before Marlene could respond, her radio crackled. Vasquez to the grand ballroom. Immediately. The voice belonged to Collins, strained and formal. Eliza raised her eyebrows. What did you do now? No idea, Marlene sighed, storing her mop. Probably accused of stealing toilet paper or something equally ridiculous. The grand ballroom stood at the heart of the opulence, used only for the most prestigious events. As Marlene approached, she noticed staff members from every department filing inside: front desk clerks, kitchen staff, maintenance workers, housekeepers, all looking equally confused. Collins intercepted her at the door, his typically smug expression replaced with barely concealed panic. There you are. Get in there, front row. And for God's sake, straighten your name tag. Front row? What's going on? Just do it, he hissed, practically shoving her through the doorway. The ballroom had been arranged with rows of chairs facing a small stage. Corporate executives occupied one side, hotel staff the other. Marlene reluctantly took the indicated seat in the front row, feeling conspicuous in her cleaning uniform amidst management's business attire. At precisely 2 p.m., the ballroom doors opened again. A hush fell over the assembled staff as a distinguished silver-haired man entered, flanked by security. Marlene's heart stopped. It was Gerald, but transformed. Gone were the worn tweed and rain-soaked shoes. Instead, he wore an impeccably tailored suit with a subtle platinum tie clip bearing the opulence logo. He moved with purpose and authority, acknowledging the executives with brief nods as he approached the stage. Good afternoon, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the room. For those who don't recognize me, I am Gerald Whitmore, CEO and founder of Whitmore Hospitality Group. A wave of whispers rippled through the staff section. Marlene sat frozen, unable to process what she was seeing. The kindly old man she'd sheltered in the staff lounge was the owner of the entire hotel chain? Many of you are wondering why I've called this meeting, Gerald continued. For the past 3 months, I've been conducting an undercover evaluation of our properties, experiencing our hotels as our guests do, observing our operations from the ground level rather than spreadsheets and quarterly reports. His gaze swept the room before landing directly on Marlene. A small smile played at his lips. What I discovered was troubling. In too many locations, including this flagship property, we've forgotten the founding principle of Whitmore Hospitality: genuine care for every person who walks through our doors, guest or employee. He gestured to the executives. My team has spent the past 3 days conducting a thorough audit of the Opulence Grand's operations, finances, and management practices. The results necessitate immediate changes. Gerald picked up a folder from the podium. Diane Hemsworth, Richard Collins, please step forward. The general manager and supervisor moved stiffly to the stage, Hemsworth's practiced smile now brittle, Collins' face ashen. Ms. Hemsworth, our audit revealed systematic misreporting of training hours, substitution of inferior products while charging premium rates, and fostering a management culture that prioritizes appearances over substance. He turned to Collins. Mr. Collins, your department shows the highest turnover rate in the company, multiple documented instances of retaliatory scheduling, and misappropriation of employee bonus funds. Gerald closed the folder. Effective immediately, you are both relieved of your positions at Whitmore Hospitality Group. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Security personnel stepped forward, escorting the stunned former managers toward the exit. This is outrageous, Hemsworth sputtered. You can't possibly. I assure you, I can and have, Gerald replied calmly. Your severance details will be provided by HR. Please clear your offices by the end of the day. As they disappeared through the doors, Gerald's expression softened. Now to more pleasant business. His eyes found Marlene again. Ms. Vasquez, would you join me, please? Marlene felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her legs trembled as she stood and made her way to the stage. 3 nights ago, Gerald addressed the room. I arrived at this hotel disguised as an elderly traveler caught in the storm. I was deliberately turned away at the front desk as part of my evaluation. What happened next revealed everything about the current state of our company culture. He turned to Marlene, his voice warming. While management dismissed me without a second thought, this young woman, whose job description includes nothing about guest services, saw someone in need and acted with compassion, ingenuity, and genuine kindness. The room had fallen completely silent. She risked her position to provide shelter, warmth, and even her own meal to a stranger. And how was this extraordinary demonstration of our core values rewarded? His voice hardened. With probation. Disciplinary action. Threats to her livelihood. Marlene stared at the floor, overwhelmed by the surreal turn of events. Look at me, Marlene, Gerald said gently. She raised her eyes to meet his. What you did that night is exactly what Whitmore hospitality was founded to embody. Not blind adherence to protocols, not superficial courtesy masking indifference, but authentic care for another human being. Gerald turned back to the assembled staff. Today marks the beginning of Project Restoration across all Whitmore properties. We're returning to our roots, prioritizing meaningful guest experiences and valuing the employees who create them. His hand came to rest on Marlene's shoulder. Starting with recognizing those who already exemplify these principles, even when they thought no one was watching. The applause began slowly, then built to a thunderous crescendo that echoed through the grand ballroom. Through her shock, Marlene caught a glimpse of Eliza in the crowd, grinning and clapping wildly. For the first time in years, Marlene felt visible, truly seen for who she was, not just for the uniform she wore. And as Gerald Whitmore announced that the storm had passed for the opulence grand, she dared to hope it might be passing for her too. 2 months after the storm that changed everything, Marlene stood before the full-length mirror in her new apartment, barely recognizing her reflection. Gone was the gray maintenance uniform. In its place, a tailored navy blue suit with the opulence grand's golden crest embroidered above her heart. Her name badge now read, Marlene Vasquez, Guest Relations Ambassador. You look important, Marco said from his wheelchair in the doorway, grinning with pride. I look terrified, Marlene corrected, adjusting her collar for the 5th time. The company gala starts in an hour, and Gerald, Mr. Whitmore, wants me to speak. Marco wheeled closer. About time someone asked you to. The weeks following the ballroom confrontation had unfolded like a dream. Gerald had created a new position for Marlene, Guest Relations Ambassador, with a salary that eliminated the need for her second job. The role leveraged her natural empathy and problem-solving skills, tasking her with ensuring every guest received the authentic care that had impressed Gerald himself. More importantly, the position came with comprehensive benefits that covered Marco's treatments and physical therapy. Their new ground-floor apartment was wheelchair accessible, and just 10 minutes from the hotel, a vast improvement over their previous 3rd-floor walk-up. What if I freeze up there? Marlene asked, smoothing her already smooth lapels. The same Marlene who faced down collection agencies and hospital bureaucrats is worried about a speech? Marco laughed. You've got this, sis. The sound of a car horn interrupted them. Through the window, Marlene spotted the sleek town car sent to escort them to the gala. They sent a car for both of us? Marco asked in disbelief. Gerald insisted, Marlene replied. He said tonight's about family. The grand ballroom had been transformed since the day of the management shakeup. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegantly set tables. Hotel staff from all Whitmore properties mingled with executives and board members, no longer segregated by position or title. As Marlene and Marco entered, Rebecca Chin, the COO, approached immediately. There's our guest of honor, Rebecca said warmly. Gerald's been asking for you. He's by the stage. Marlene navigated through the crowd, many stopping to greet her. Some she recognized from her janitorial days. Faces that had once looked through her now brightened with recognition and respect. Gerald stood conversing with several board members, but excused himself when he spotted Marlene and Marco. "The Vasquez siblings!" he exclaimed, shaking Marco's hand. "I'm delighted you could both attend." "Wouldn't miss it," Marco replied. "Though I'm still not sure why I get an invitation to a company event." Gerald's eyes twinkled. "Because tonight we're celebrating more than corporate milestones. We're honoring the values that should define us, values your sister exemplifies." Later, as dinner concluded, Gerald took the stage. The ballroom fell silent as he adjusted the microphone. 2 months ago, I stood in this room and spoke about a return to our founding principles," he began. "Tonight, I'm proud to share that Project Restoration has already yielded remarkable results." Screens around the ballroom displayed statistics. Customer satisfaction up 27%, employee turnover down 32%, internal promotion rates increased across all properties. "These numbers tell one story," Gerald continued. "But the real transformation can't be captured in metrics. It's happening in countless human interactions, moments of genuine connection that define the hospitality experience." He gestured toward Marlene's table. "No one embodies this transformation better than tonight's honoree. Marlene Vasquez joined us 5 years ago as maintenance staff. Today, she leads our flagship guest relations program, a program now being implemented throughout our company." The spotlight found Marlene, and applause filled the room. "Marlene, would you join me?" Heart pounding, she made her way to the stage. Gerald stepped aside, giving her the podium. Marlene looked out at the sea of faces, Marco beaming proudly from his table, colleagues who had become friends, executives who now knew her by name. She took a deep breath. 2 months ago, I was mopping floors and living paycheck to paycheck," she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "I helped an elderly gentleman caught in a storm because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected anything in return." She glanced at Gerald. "Little did I know that simple act would change everything. But the truth is, that night wasn't extraordinary for me. It's how my grandfather raised me and my brother, to see people, not problems." Marlene's gaze swept the room. "What's extraordinary is working for a company that now recognizes and values those principles. In the past 2 months, I've seen maintenance workers' suggestions implemented in guest rooms. I've watched housekeepers promoted to training roles. I've seen barriers between departments dissolve as we remember we're all working toward the same goal, making people feel valued." She paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "This isn't about me. It's about what happens when we remember that every interaction matters, whether it's with a CEO in disguise or a stranger genuinely in need. It's about treating people with dignity regardless of their title, position, or circumstance." The room had grown completely still, hanging on her words. "My brother Marco taught me that," she continued, finding his face in the crowd. "Despite challenges most of us can't imagine, he approaches each day with grace and resilience. He taught me that our circumstances don't define us, our choices do." As she concluded her speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Gerald returned to her side, presenting her with an engraved crystal award. "Marlene Vasquez, embodiment of the Whitmore spirit." Later, as the evening wound down, Gerald found Marlene and Marco near the dessert table. "Quite a speech," he said. The board was impressed. "It was from the heart," Marlene replied. Gerald nodded thoughtfully. "I've been meaning to ask, that night in the storm, why did you help me when no one else would? You risked everything for a stranger." Marlene considered the question. "I guess I believe we're all just one storm away from needing someone's kindness. Today it might be you, tomorrow it might be me." Marco smiled. "That's Marlene. Always rescheduling the storm for someone else." Gerald's eyes brightened. "The rainy night reschedule," he mused. "I like that." As they laughed together, Marlene realized the true transformation wasn't in her job title or apartment or bank account. It was in being seen, truly seen, for who she had always been. The storm had passed, the skies had cleared, and in its wake, a new day had dawned, not just for Marlene and Marco, but for everyone touched by the simple act of kindness on that rainy night.